Hello. Good morning, everybody. My name is Szabolcs Kisspál, and I'm gonna try to kind of coordinate this discussion. And I must say that throughout the first kind of part of this conference, I think many people felt a kind of anxiety and sort of depression in regard to what we are facing, this continuous permanent crisis thing. So I thought maybe we should cheer up a bit the atmosphere, even though I must say that I might be one of the most pessimistic person in the room, which I will try not to speak about. Nonetheless, what we're gonna speak about is a kind of research collective or research constellation. And the reason that I find, let's say, their activity of an optimistic nature, it is that, in my understanding, and I hope that this discussion will shed some more light on the details, whether it's like that or not. But in my understanding, there is some hope still in this permanent crisis, given the fact that what they try to do is they try to establish all kinds of alliances with, let's say, leftover pockets of resistance on a very wide range. And I think this is one of the only things we can hope for to happen. So at the beginning I thought maybe I gonna read some short aspects of your bios or CVs, what you have on this site. And after introducing this Red Forest kind of project, which is, I'm quoting the site here now, is a research constellation activated by Oleksiy Radynski. We could meet him online yesterday, who were there, David Muñoz-Alcántara, Diana McCarty and Mijke van der Drift, that emerged as a name during a research visit to Chornobyl Nuclear Power Station in spring 2021. The constellation of Red Forest, it is not confined to a single discipline. That's where our hope is. But their work spans through media theory, philosophy, anti-colonial praxis, queer theory, feminism, and contemporary critical theory. And their shared practices comprise architecture, radio, film, and performance. The collective produced the On the Loss of Energy radiogram from the remnants of collisions commissioned for the 2023 Helsinki Biennial. This is what you can see in the background. It is a 1.5 hours long radiogram. I hope we're gonna speak about this as well a bit, but actually it is accessible to everyone, so later on you are more than welcome to check out the sound piece on this site. And so maybe at this point I would just go through our guests, whom I'm very happy to introduce. Diana McCarty, who is coming from the cyberpunk scene of the 90s, and she's an independent media producer and feminist media activist, founding editor of Reboot FM, which is a radio. She is the co-curator of various festivals and exhibitions and various other networks, and her work revolves around art, gender, politics, radical feminism, technology, and media. And on this particular side, there is one more thing added, that she is a proud Chicana from Abergir. So I wonder to what extent your identity forms your practice. If we can can have a short reply, and then we go further, okay?
Do I get the microphone?
Yeah, oh, sorry.
I think, especially like when I landed in Budapest, I was really trying to escape the culture wars that had touched New Mexico, where identity politics were, where there was an existence that was really fraught with politics. Funnily enough, most of my friends and people I don't know very well thought that I went south to Mexico and joined the Zapatistas, because that would have made perfect sense for them, like for me. But I really wanted to go someplace else and be free from that. Hungary provided that brief opportunity, which is really changing, and I think especially given the political conditions in the US, it's very important to state these things, because the way that we understand ourselves, like as Chicanos or as Latinos or whatever, that has become so fraught, so politicized and so demonized, that it's very important to speak up. So it definitely informs who and what I am and how I can empathize with others, so for sure. But of course, yeah, that's...
Yeah, thank you very much. Maybe later on we can get back on what is the connection of your kind of background with what you're doing now. But let's move now to Mijke van der Drift, who is a philosopher and educator and who works on ethics as a focal point in a multidisciplinary research about social transformation and the philosophy of movement. Tutor at the Royal College of Art and co-authoring the publication Transfam Futures with Nat Raha, while working on a monograph, Multilogical Ethics. And Mijke gives talks internationally on philosophy, theory, and gender, and has taught in many art institutions in the UK and abroad. So may I ask, what do you mean by multilogical ethics? So what makes it multilogical, and how do you approach the dynamics of transformation, or what would be your short interpretation of that?
Cool, thank you. So I think if, to explain multilogic simply, I think if you want to find out how hegemony works, it is not so much point of looking at what the middle of the road is doing. You have to, I think, better look at the radicals that try to escape and how they harbor and nurture settler colonial logics. Because I don't think there is a crisis. We are just still in the same boomerang of colonialism coming home to Europe, doing the same old things. And we're not going to be better when we get included. It's not going to be better when we unionize. And I say that as a unionizer and as one of the more optimistic people in this room, maybe. I'm really one of the nature's optimists. I think the only way that we can, with unionizing, do something, because it's the trench where the workers find themselves, and we're never going to win from management. The only thing we can do is destroy every single institution that we have, including Lima. Even though it might be good. But as long as we keep on thinking as institutions and try to give ourselves to law, whereby we harbor the kind of bourgeois liberalism that is the problem, the crisis will just always be there, and we are it.
Thank you very much, Mijke. Yeah. And our third guest is David Muñoz-Alcántara, whose works intersects art, architecture, philosophy, and research, which they focus on producing and reproducing revolutionary poetics of art, grounded in the liberation struggles and insurgent indigenous pluricommunalisms. They seek to forward the understanding of art as class struggle in the imagination and aesthetic praxis grounded in people's liberation, merged in socio-ecological collective constructions of autonomy. This might sound a bit kind of complex. Actually, the text is being taken from this website. I was very happy to find out actually yesterday why we had We had a pretty optimistic discussion actually in the evening, which I guess the unicums also contributed to it. So maybe we should share unicum in order to to get rid of our pessimism. Nonetheless, I was happy to find out about David, that he's in touch, and his main focus is the Chiapas kind of issue, which was one of the main kind of media reference back in the 90s. So I'm very curious about how you would describe your actual position to these issues.
Yeah, I mean, how to start this? Like, it's not me, you know, it's we, and this we is like porous, and question. I mean, it's kind of, yeah, how to go further into it. It's like what we're seeing is that in the last 10 years, in the last year, what was happening in the last 10 years, somehow we have the same ratio of murdering, of genocides, of feminicide, you know, so it's compressed, like, we're losing time. And the state, I mean, the coalition between the state, the paramilitary groups, the criminal organization, the narco dealers, like, and the corporations is just getting tighter and tighter. Flexibilization of borders, like, and you have all these projects of infrastructures that have been there for like more than 100 years. You know, it's the same plan. It's like it's been orchestrated. It's the same plan. So maybe just like to put the question in the contemporary, it's like if we look at the indigenous genocide and the ecocide that is happening, it is in the modernity, like what we see in modernity is when it's actually taking place. Like it's usually given to us like in history lectures, like okay, colonial times was something, and then the nation state was started. Actually, the true genocide is after the nation state, and it's being actually. If we look, like in the case of Mexico, just quick reference, like 90% of the population within the beginning of the nation state will practice different political forms, will have different languages, will have different educational processes. In the 50s, it deteriorated maybe to half, and then from the 50s onwards, nowadays we have in the 2000s, we have 12%. Now it's going to 6%. So if you see like the massive eradication, I mean, what we're having, it is a constant state of war, and it's like it's taking many hybrid forms, but it's a war of erasure. It is a war of homogenization, a war of hegemony, and all these things. So maybe this is like for me the summary of where to focus.
Yes, thank you very much. And may I suggest to zoom in a bit into this piece, or this project, let's call it rather a project. I would have a few questions here, and let's see if we need to go through all of them, or maybe the conversation is going to get hijacked, which I would be happy if it happens. Nonetheless, I was wondering if you would like to reflect a bit on the background of your collaboration. Yesterday we spoke about Bach, the Basis für aktuelle Kunst in Utrecht, where I understand that somehow the seed of this collaboration has been found or has been planted. Yeah, referring to the seeds, you also have on the site a rather large kind of list of numerous list of people you collaborated with, including writers, interface designers, filmmakers, philosophers, musicians, and so on and so forth, which you are calling the growing ensemble. So I would appreciate if you could reflect on how the whole thing started, and how do you see this growing ensemble of researchers, or how do we define them?
Should we mention that we've been in Budapest before? But we were in Kiev, so we came here via the interwebs. So we were Red Forest, as Red Forest was in the
Off-Biennale.
Off-Biennale.
In 21. And we zoomed in. 22. Okay.
22.
We were in Kiev.
We were, yeah. Anyhow, we've been here. We're back. Our teleportation devices are a little bit slow, so it took us a while to materialize.
When we came here, we were actually sitting in front of a Zoom in a sort of like a large empty space in Kiev, in a sort of apartment where the jets were flying by in front of the window, rehearsing for the military day of independence. And we were running circles around the Zoom so that one of us talks and then sits in front of the computer. So we were talking to each other, making up what we're saying as we're going along, and it worked really well. So we're going to do the same thing now, except we have to sit down.
Yeah.
Nothing more to add.
Okay, thank you. So this particular, I'm always in trouble how to call it, because it's not a piece for sure. It is somehow a specific format that you summarized a rather long period of collective research together with Oleksiy, right? Nonetheless, it has, you named this format as a radiogram, which is not surprising, knowing your background, especially that of Diana's background. Nonetheless, on the site you make reference to Harun Farocki. May I just quote this reference, because I think it is quite important. So you describe your work that in a Farockian transmission of resistance to extractivist mechanism of mattering, form waves to atoms to forms of life and war. The radiogram summons fragmented connections and exchanges between disparate sides of struggle. And I thought it's, so I would be very interested in to hear from you, how do you define this format of radiogram, especially if we recall the very influential film of Farocki and Andrzej Juzika, which was published or which was released again around the time of the first Metaforum meeting, and which was called Videograms of a Revolution in 1993. So I guess that it's not a coincidence that we speak here about radiogram, and I wonder how would you position this format?
Yeah, I had the pleasure before we came to Kiev to give a talk in Vilnius in an old KGB prison, which they hadn't fully dismantled. And it was very curious, because I'm really committed to abolition, as you might guess, with my comments about institutions. But what this prison was not abolition. That was so interesting. It was just stripped of the former content, and it just kept in place, but it immediately became capitalism. And coming from, but being in Vilnius at that time, they were showing this piece, Videograms of the Revolution. So I had a very good time sitting down there and watching the entirety of it, because the pleasure of traveling is that you actually have time to slow down and do something, because in my usual life, it's way too busy. And I think what the radiogram helped us do in that sense is to slow down with each other and mix things together that sometimes seem disparate. So one of the things that I do there is I think from the point of living with one of my close distant friends. So somebody who's not always in your everyday, but who is close at a distance. And over a series of lying around in parks, sitting around in back rooms, we're discussing the problem of how relational harassment happens. Why Brexit is not something to keep people out, but is actually a ruse to keep people in, because British people cannot leave the UK, which I think is almost a larger problem. And we were talking that through, and by thinking through it on that level, the level of the point of we're living, lying around in London, where I live, but my friend doesn't. I think we create a certain tension with the work that you were doing. Maybe you want to say something about it and what you were doing in the radiogram.
How to start? I mean, I think we were in the middle of a caravan, transiting 13 locations, sites of conflict in the southeast of Mexico, with a large documentary team and social researchers, anthropologists, activists, and so on, and also like community political organizers. Yeah, I mean, the idea is to see what is happening there. Like, you have interconnected infrastructures that are, there was like two questions. One was the centrality of the gas that was bringing Oleksy's research on the Nord Stream, and then the pipelines that are coming all the way from Alaska to the coast, to the Gulf of Mexico, and the distribution lines of those energetic extraction projects, and what is becoming in between, like this kind of, like a return of a paradigm, like in the border regimes, like. So that project, the insistence of that project from the side of the Mexican government, but also with the, like at that moment also there were military operations, trade winds, no? Mobilization of over 800,000 military units from all across the world to do contention of social distress. You know, so all these rehearsals of how they could block the emergence of a civil revolutionary war to contest these things. So the imposition of this project, for instance, in gas terms, it was 12%. It increased 12% of productivity of the market export of the U.S. Liquid gas, and this is like a tension that was happening just before the Russian war on Ukraine started to happen. So that's one of the things, and then a couple of things that we also noticed, like or data that we've been compiling, like for instance, in that context of the borders of what is called Mexico, over 12 million people, undocumented migrants, and a third of them, they are in prisons there, like 400,000, like 4 million, sorry, are there like in prison. So we see like so how the machine, like the industrialization of apartheid, the industrialization of prison, it is becoming kind of automatic. No, it's an automatization process. We see how the migrants that are coming are already into a change of incorporated into a chain of production that like integrated into temporary economic zones with no regulation, like all these things. No, so yeah, it was a very intensive time, and some of the things were kind of compiled also, like how to bring this into a different level, but also what kind of how these things also permeate kind of with social psychology, with other forms of speaking that are not only like the data and the how do we ground that also?
Thank you, Dana.
I'm going to go with a little GIF. Okay. So water, rain, rain. Bullets raining down. Okay, bullets rain. These are two different types of rain. Right? The ones that rule and the ones that come down from the skies. And then there's the bullets that come down from the skies in a rain, from the rain. Okay, rainbows make me happy. I thought we were looking for a Lucretius-style articulation of the lives of the non-human, the pain of plants, when the water dries, right? Modern myths. I heard about the water that caught on fire, and I wondered how can water burn? And then they told me about the trees that don't die. I wonder if butterflies cry. It's too rhymey, okay? This is, that's not, it's like these are little fragments, and I'm like, I don't know where these come from. But one thing is that I know that when we were in Kiev having a grill party in our dirty garden as we were preparing for the Sambata staging performance, which was one of our initial things, and when we sort of had figured out that we are the Red Forest, and that is the undying trees of Chernobyl, right? The trees that don't grow, but the trees that don't die. And this is something like kind of getting close to other life forms. And then we did have, I think, like a fake seance to call forth Lucretius. who we were heavily reading and, you know, really like based off Mijke's energetic materialism. And then Harun Farokhi showed up on the screen. And so we called up Lucretius and we got Farokhi. So this is an answer to your question. And I think it's one thing for me is that we're not, like, there's a lot of complexity in the bullets that are falling down and the rain. It's like there's poison rain, right? So all of these things that how we live and the crossover between the lives that we live are facing these different types of wars. And there is this war on the world that we live within, and that's the war on nature. And that's something like, you know, something like water is life. The very water that we need is so much under threat. And it's not a, yeah, it's beyond a crisis. So, yeah, you want the mic back?
Yeah, thank you. I have two other questions here, which I will try to compile somehow in one, because maybe it's easier for you to react on. I listened to this radiogram, and if you're gonna have the chance to do the same, you will find out that there are like documentary fragments, quotes from different quotes from various media sources, excerpts from like sound samples or excerpts from different demonstrations and personal narratives and music and so on and so forth. And there is a narrative. So one part of my question would be, what is the function, or how do you see the function of narrative within your rendering your research into form? And the other question it would reflect, as you kind of have lots of references on the body. As the site of a struggle, like the queer body, the trans body, you deal a lot with water, with certain mythological aspects of water and so on. And there is even a kind of reference in the description text in which you say that the trans body is auto-fictioning as a mode of engagement, right? So I would be really interested in the relationship of, let's say, fiction and documentaries, which I have the feeling that you are applying in this piece, and also the, let's say, the revolutionary potential of fiction, or even poetry, as in some parts David kind of articulated it. So it might have been a bit of a too complex question, but you are, yeah, for sure, you are free to react on any part of it you feel. So I wonder who would like to get the mic.
Yeah, I can start a little bit. I mean, yeah, I think it's obvious to say, no, what is the potential of poetry and the policing, and that, like, anything we throw into the atmosphere is throwing also back to us. And what we need to engage is actively into the process of contestation, and that's why for me it's very important to remind myself, okay, if we work from the art perspective, art is class struggle in imagination, and what can we imagine? Like what kind of transformation of reality we are there putting, like, and it doesn't need, we might not recognize it concretely, but we might not have the words on how to say it, but we are able to make it tangible in different ways. So that's, I think, I mean, for me the key. And if you look at the, I mean, if you are familiar with the Zapatista Army of National Liberation and the communiques they have been releasing, it's like all encoded in poetics, it's all encoded in like different levels of encryption of language. And that interpeals like a whole variety of things, but also at the same time eludes the possibility of institutions of copying, eludes the possibility of the government, of, like, of course they are taking phrases like the good government, you know? Now the state is using this kind of phrasing, but we know like that it is just an empty phrase without a practice. There is no practice there. On the other side, we have the resource of practice. It's just about how do we align ourselves, like how do we become, and I throw this, like, how do we become complicit? How do we recognize our complicity with this, and then we take a stand? And whether, like, yeah, we know, I mean, in the sense of the indigenous struggles in the Abya like, one of the key slogans is like, we are not defending nature, we're nature defending ourselves. No? So it's not a dissociation, it's not a dissociative, it's a porous, it's not a, like, homogeneous, it's not like the political the political horizon is complex in a sense that it's allowing kind of difference, it's allowing like all these like contradictions, and the frictions are actually what are bringing the. So I'm in a question like, how do we shift this question of permanent crisis? I mean, even crisis like, we know it's a war. It's a war that has been going on our bodies, like psychologies, territory, so on. And war is the way to reconstitute. It's the way capital kind of reproduce itself. There is no other like. So either we transform that war in kind of revolutionary process, or then we like.
Thanks for bringing up the complicity, and I found it very helpful that Oleksiy started also to mention it yesterday. I think one of the key things we can do is recognize our complicity, right? Because otherwise we start to claim our innocence, and once we have innocence, we need an institution and a sort of patriarch to defend and protect that innocence. So it is really, I think the key feminist or trans-feminist step is to say, like, I am complicit from where I am, and from that complicity, that enfoldedness into the world, we can see where we go. And I think in that sense, like talking about the auto-fictioning of trans bodies, I think we see this a lot, like trans people sort of narrating a part of their story, often mediated by editors or video editors or film editors. And I think the helpful thing of that is that it unearths where you are complicit, where your military metaphors come in. Right? Do we still think, like yesterday the boat was mentioned, I thought it was very helpful because the boat of modernity is obviously the slave ship, is obviously the point of logistics. So it doesn't matter whether you have a boat that is a slave ship or a boat that is a spaceship. It's still the same militarized logistics that we're thinking in. So the point is that the futurity that speaks out of that fictioning is the point of the navigator, right? And then with the help of Christina Sharp, it is like we turn around, we look at the wake, right? It is the almost Lucretian viewpoint where the future is always behind you, so you row a bit slower and you look constantly to the legacy, that what you leave behind, and you see like falling in front of you what you have become. So in that sense, transness and auto-fictioning is transness is what kind of new relations can we constitute together, because gender is the direct relationing in your environment, where racialization is more the institutionalization of exclusion, right? It is the formalized violence, where gendering is much more immediate. And I think that is what we're trying to figure out also by recombining and combining these fragments, because the scaling doesn't become a nice, clean, single narrative ever, right? This is why we combine the caravan with me and my friend lying around in a London park talking about police violence. Yeah, passing on to you now.
Yes, yeah. I like the way you're moving, because for us, it's also, we started doing a lot of like movement with thinking and understanding how much our bodies, how much our physical state informs what we're able to think and how we're able to think through things. And I'm thinking that like one of the things we started to look at is, I think I would call it like sonically mapping all of these different shifting spaces, because we are all like here in it, we are all here coexisting, and yet each reality is very different. So we are in a shared space, we are having this shared moment, and yet everything that brought each of us here is very different. And that just like, those are all like parallel universes that collide into one. And I would go with like sharp, like in the wake, but also what's to the left of us, what's to the right of us, and these multiple realities, and trying to embrace the contradictions in this. And like that's one of the things is dealing with the contradictions. What does it mean to live in a capitalist world, in a neoliberalist world, and not fight that, right? Choose your battles, fight those, but understand what they're in relation to. And I think this is where we try to, I think more it's like we try to problem each other. And so we are sharing our problems, and through that, I think maybe not looking for answers, but really looking for how to think things through and do things. And I think that would be the important thing, is also not coming up with a set of solutions for problems that are much bigger than us, but a set of practices. And I would just go with, yeah, wait, a little tiny, like another little meandering here, which is, the phone, like, yeah, come on, you're supposed to turn around. Like, yeah. They say the stars will tell us which potatoes to plant if you know how to read the cosmic dust. Opacity. And cartographies, right? And what about simply learning how to live and love and be in the world, right? And those are things like, how do we keep enough energy to live to fight another day, and like not be, I wasn't going to call it permacrisis, but speaking to you yesterday is that this idea that what is it called? I'm saying out my English. What is it called when you're so depressed you're not able to do anything? Depressed, but paralyzed. Yeah, like this. To not let this paralysis or this other things that keep us from moving. And I think so. It's like agitate, agitate, and activate. Organize, yeah. But it's like organizing sometimes becomes too much of a, as if that's all it takes. So I'm going to go with activate and demonstrate, but it means to do.
Because I think, David, you said this morning something so super helpful that was related to that, because so on the one hand, we have to stay in a movement, and sometimes when positionality is mentioned, it is mentioned as a way to keep us apart, right? Because it is about what we do. It is not about the positionality. The positionality that we have is our starting point, because in the end it's about our ethics. It is about how we get together, how we build new forms of life together. But then I think this morning and it's chimed something, but what you said yesterday about here being business as usual, or maybe you can comment on that after David. You talked about the consensus of apathy, right? The consensus of apathy that we kind of try to break. Could you say something about that?
Yeah. I mean, I was really through speaking to different compass all around. We know that the conjuncture we are living is actually that the structures of society that somehow build like freedom, equity, all these things, they are not functioning, or they are functioning not for us, but to put us against us, to put against us. And we see it more in the open, the fascist turn that we're seeing in Europe, for instance, that is openly attacking these things, but they are defending themselves with those tools that were built out of struggle. So I feel like a lot of people actually we have generations that has got stagnated in those forms of political horizon without knowing to exercise, to do the political practice. So how do we come together, discuss the things, change the things in the process and change ourselves and all these things. And I think a lot of people is paralyzed because of that fear, okay, yeah, let the parliament collapse, how are we going to survive, how are we going to live after with that? Let this, and of course the threat is huge because the asymmetry of power is also, it is huge and so on. So it is not an easy challenge, but I think, but it's not the end of the world.
Yes, I'm not sure if I should go into this rather specific Hungarian paralysis in the terms of social, let's say, and cultural impotence to some extent, I would say. Maybe just very briefly, I've been very much involved in various activist movements, starting from 2012 maybe, for about 5 years. What I got, and then it ended. And for sure it ended because it just didn't really lead anywhere, we had the feeling. We invested a huge amount of energy into trying to stop different processes, and it was impossible. And we had to come to terms with that. But then practically what happened, and that's the reason I consider your project a very, let's say, hopeful one, or even optimistic one. Because what really happened there at some point, maybe at around 2015, 2016, is that somehow not only us, like the groups I was making part of, but all the small groups that were representing different, let's say, pockets of resistance, all of them collapsed somehow in a synchronicity, which was pretty much unexpected, even though it belonged to the dynamics of those years. So for that reason, I believe that like your, let's say, tactic, if we might call it like that, and this is going to be actually my next and maybe last question. For that reason, I consider that your tactic might be, let's say, a productive one, or by connecting, you know, various different points of view which share actually all of them something which could be identified as repression, either cultural repression, social, gender-wise, whatever, right? So somehow to unite those positions and to kind of facilitate, I was very happy to hear David mentioning the imagination, right? So to somehow to produce together that, let's say, radical imagination, taking this term from Jonas Stahl, whom I appreciate very much. Right, like the radical imagination. How can you produce a radical imagination of that sense? And just getting back as to my last question, and still kind of not leaving the Red Forest context, that you somehow articulate some objectives of the project, and one of the, you identify 3 of them on the side. One would be the collective growth of eco-social dignity. The second one, as far as I understood, is the recovery of insurgent indigenous bonds. And the trans-futurism, which already has been mentioned here. So I wonder what do you mean by these concepts, or are you using them as references, and to what extent would you rely on them as the basis of your further tactics?
I'm just thinking that, for me, right, I'm gonna call it magic communism. And again, work further with attempts to reconcile the contradictions between materialism, like good old-fashioned materialism, energetic materialism, and other like ways of being in the world, and understand those as political projects and political practices that don't leave the esoteric space to the right wing and the fascios. So, and also, I'm going to say, try to have some fun while deconstructing Big Daddy mainframe.
Sorry, to be super honest, I didn't know that we had those objectives. I completely forgot about that. I think that is also partly the point. Like, you stake out some things, and then if they don't stick to you, you sort of move on. But I bring out a book called Transparent Futures, which I wrote with my friend and colleague Raha. So I think I'm doing something about transfuturism in the sense that we say we want to live now as if it is already the better then. Because we're not going to sit around and just get to do with all this straight up shit that you have to do every day. So we start to hang out with each other and have a good time. But I think one of the things, why it's so nice to bring these different things, and I recognize them as soon as you read them out, I go like, yeah, we have been saying that, it's nice, wow, this sounds really good actually. Maybe we should go back to this is fantastic. It is quite helpful because one of the things that it doesn't try to do, and you see these objectives are somehow fairly different. We don't try to homogenize it. We don't try to go like, hey, sorry, but speaking as a trans person, I think you should just gender a bit differently. I think we're not going to go there, right? We're not going to go in this middle-class policing of each other's minds and bodies. And I think the good thing is, and it was partly the work I was doing in BAC with my dear friend there, Joy Mariana Smith, because they were the baddies, and I was working with somebody else before I joined them. And we were working something like choreographies of consent. And we were looking at forms of how to say yes, but also how to say no. So how can you leave something? Because if you can't leave, you're in deep problems. And how can you say yes, where the yes is not a sort of new legalistic formalizing, right? How do you make it a choreography? How does your body say yes? Or how does your being together say yes to each other? And I think when we move together, I think we keep looking for that yes and that no, and we keep looking for the friction and the hangout. And that produces then things like this that pops up, kind of in a way, and then we abandon it because our attention goes elsewhere. But because we stick with each other, and we've been sticking with each other for over 5 years now in this project that we called Red Forest ultimately, it is also kind of a circular thing. So this is why these things that we have sort of like, they're sort of in the past over there, and then we find them back, and we go like, oh shit, yeah, I recognize it actually, I forgot about that. But because it is still the same thing what we're doing, but it's another iteration and another form, I think. And it is a different kind of futurism, and then I give it to you, David, so you know it's going to come. Than the futurism we had in the 90s, because I think all the talk we see now about, oh well, yeah, we have Anthropocene and now we're very aware of climate change. Sorry, I'm from the 70s and I grew up with climate change because it was like my entire life people were talking to me about climate change. I was born in the year that the report of the Club of Rome came out saying like, oh, this is not going to go well. In the 90s, I was part of the environmental movement that got destroyed by governments. That is the same governments that now go, oh shit man, climate change, ooh, we need to do something. But it's the same people that destroyed us, right? And that are now destroying the climate movement with the help of oil companies who are lobbying those by saying, oh, we have to insist on policy and proper procedure, rather than these anarcho rebels that are constantly saying that we have to stop doing what we're doing because we want to live something else. So that is the futurity that we want to have in the present, I guess. That's what we're talking about.
I'm gonna grab it and give it to you. This is a commercial announcement. You can purchase our Red Forest. No, yeah. We chose early on not to have like a website that explained us. So we've done more things than this, and eventually we will put them all together. But for example, if you're interested, there's the Red Forest radiograms that we produced for the Milan Triennale, which was wonderful because like in the middle of that, suddenly Russia invaded the Ukraine, and Germany was like, oh, you can't talk about Nord Stream. Like our project was put on like hold because of German government bureaucratic funding problems in general, and then they were like, oh, you shouldn't do that. So anyhow, the project was restarted, but it was a completely weird and psycho situation. Nevertheless, you can look for Red Forest radiograms, and Milan Good Institute, one thing they did good was put them everywhere. So there are more. There was some Bata staging, so we've done different things. And I would just say, for me personally, it's very interesting to counter the sort of deep-rooted, like very, like the Cambridge analytics and the way that propaganda operates there, and find other ways to counter that with loving possibilities. But yeah, that's the end of the commercial. The commercial announcement is that you can find other stuff of ours for free if you look around.
Yeah, I don't know if as Mike was saying, like its objectives are objectives, or just like some kind of spots of light that keeps us help us navigate what is happening, what we're doing, and when we go into different processes. But it is certain that I mean, insurgency is at the core of it, and the insurgency for at least my position is like building popular revolutionary autonomy. And what does that mean? I mean, it's reconnecting your bond to the land, like knowing how it is moving, what is affecting it, like be implicated, be complicit with how it's giving the defense of life, the defense of life, and so on. And then how do you organize that on a different scale, and what do we learn, like from that, but also what kind of infrastructures we leave, what kind of technologies we produce, and now how do those become also common part of other struggles. And I think this is like the call, like, I mean, for me this is a call like that has been there, and then the line is not that we're reinventing the wheel, you know, it's just like we just need to know our history, we need to keep the memory alive, we need to, this is the thing, like, and then the rest will, like, we will see, you know, it's not, nothing is for granted.
Can I say one thing?
So when David is talking about autonomy, it's something extremely different is meant than when I am talking about autonomy, right? So I'm talking from a European space of thinking, where I say we have to stop citing anybody from Descartes to Fanon for 200 years at least. So that is why I'm anti-autonomy, because I'm trained by German philosophers. And so I'm like trained in this Kantian form of autonomy. And there was like the forced sterilization of trans people in the Netherlands between 1985 and 2014, like in so many other countries in Europe. And they were happening in university hospitals under the heading of autonomy. So I think that is a kind of autonomy. We have to just stop thinking about it. We have to stop making that a concept that organizes ourselves. But it's really not the thing that David is talking about.
Self-determination.
Which is always collective, which is always with the land, and that is not what Europe can think.
Yeah.
Not yet.
Or not yet, that's why.
I mean, I think in more and more panels I've been participating within the context of Europe, I realize that people here is fighting for commodity. And yeah, the battle is lost. I mean, because if we look at utopia as something that we will achieve, I mean, utopia is just a reminder of like struggle, that we are like in the struggle together, that's it. But the struggle will change according to the conditions we face, to the place we are in placing, and if we don't change the terms of the combat, we will never lose, we will never win the battle. I mean, that's it.
Yeah, okay, it seems that we got back to the notion of complicity to some extent, which might be one of the most important kind of element in reflecting on crisis and what could we eventually do about it. According to the schedule, we are pretty much over, right? But we started a bit later, so if there would be any question from the or remark from the public, we are very happy to take those.
Is she leaving? I like the performance.
I just want to say two things. The one is that since the war in Ukraine started in 2022, I often think about the Cold War, and it's a different historical era, and I was born at the end of it, technically. But I was wondering that those kind of social movements which take part during the 60s and 70s are not organized by the notion of crisis, but under the notion of war. It was technically much more distinct to talk about, to differentiate between notions. And this is why I think that crisis is a kind of paralyzing term in this sense, because it's not distinct enough to technically define who is our enemy or who is not our enemy. So kind of just spreading through the things, and we are lost in this kind of sense to where we put our activism, or where we can activate, or who we are and who we can cooperate. So in a sense, this is why it's important to talk about power. And this is why I wrote my text around this notion, and to believe it that we also have it. It's not just something that we should organize our powers against, but we also have it, and it's important to rediscover this kind of notions. And the other thing is that this kind of pipeline stuff, so I really like this idea, and I think we had to mention Brian Holmes, You know him, yes. And it was very, very big pleasure to see when he gave a presentation there in the when it was still there, the Translocal Institute. You were there, I remember you. And I was wondering, he actually the main component of his art is organizing. And to organizing to what is movement, what is it, and I think it's so it is in Eastern Europe. It's very easy to say that yes, it's art and movement is not such separated in a sense, because we have this kind of tradition that this kind of things intertwined, but I don't think that the question is that. Where art starts and where the movement is ending or something like this. It's intertwined, yes, but it's always the most important thing where it's how it can be hijacked. So the issue is always like this: that where is it hijacked, or how we can protect our movement against hijacking, because. The problem is that, and back to the Cold War, the global transformation was technically that the nation states are weakened. So the transnational capital is organizing for everyday life. So it's not like, it's not so easy. Okay, we can attack the state. Okay, the state politics is always based on and have to be about discussing about the
I think I can address your topic, and I think I can bring it back to something that's pretty relevant for us, because actually, I mean, this would come later in the panel, but I don't know where János is, but basically one of the things that you have in the 80s, because I think the Cold War never really ended, it just like got put on a different burner, so it's still on the stove.
Become colder.
Yeah, but then you have
warm up and go to that.
But you had this global health crisis, which is the AIDS crisis, and then you had this extremely important combination of artists and activists, which became ACT UP, and which was extraordinarily relevant around the world, and became a really strong basis for, I think, informing what has become tactical media. And those are, like, all of those things resonate because there's a connection between Metaforum and that, and there was always, so these were resonant things that transcended borders through all kinds of issues, and these were the sort of outreaches, so these are the ways that these, like, empowerment moments have happened, where people start to reach out and find their kin out in the world. Who can I work with? Who do we have common cause with, and what can we do with that?
But I think it's also good to recognize that the 60s, 70s uprising is the anti-colonial uprisings finally reaching Europe, right?
Yes.
So it is not generated here.
Yes. But I wanted to conclude that we have to realize that globalization is not just a technological issue. It's about the organizational capital. So the weakening of the states, in a sense that economically, and the transnational capital. So it's very, very different to organize anything in these conditions. So and this is why I really respect David's project, because it's about these kind of issues. So it's not just these pipelines are there in Mexico and in the US and also in Russia. So. These are the basic things, how we extract energy and how we relate to the environment and all these kind of things. So it's like, I think this is the most important thing to think about. What is globalization? Also.
I mean, question of care and accountability, I think, should be also at the core, because you were speaking about movement, but there is no movement without social project, and I'm not talking about without the construction of a social process. It will erode. It will come, the wave will come in. So, and what do we have? We have tools of care and accountability, and those are not the institutional ones. Because the institutional ones are, the transnational capital is there because of the state, and the state is there because of the transnational capital. It's complicit. It's the same. There's no, and they're just generating the pots where violence can mobilize, the generation of surplus violence. That's it. We know the formula. but what tools do we have to keep accountable? And this is what we are facing. I mean, as a new wave of mass eradications, and then powers that are kind of drawing lines to be not held accountable. A new form of not accountability. So.
But also, if you organize a struggle only to the macro, your movement will be destroyed by patriarchy. We have seen that over and over. This is why you need to work at all the levels, right? You need to learn how to get together in a way that is with consenting, and not a way that is the purification and hierarchization that patriarchal movements create.
It's basically view of local and global. So it's like, it's so like...
Yeah, so...
Yeah, may I also add that I fully agree with David and Mike as well. Yeah, so we should avoid somehow those institutional structures that are lacking this care, like David was speaking about. And I would just suggest us not to forget another important reference, which was articulated here, the insurgency, right? So the potential of insurgency, which is not that, let's say, consistent in the, the European past, recent past. Nonetheless, for that reason, I was very happy to hear about kind of coming back of the Zapatista kind of issue and the whole Chiapas issue again into this media sort of scene discussion, because that's been already there like 30 years ago, right? It had a huge effect. It was like maybe the younger part of the public didn't really come across that reference, but it was like one of the main references in the early 90s, right? And here we are, 30 years later, with even more problems and issues that we were having earlier, and then if the big question comes, how can we keep our optimism? I would say like distributed and hopefully at some point sort of unifying forms of insurgency would be very welcome at this point. Yeah, I think we can.